Fortune 500 companies trust Interoptic for optical transceivers and cables. Since 2004, Interoptic has provided high-performance optics and cables at a fraction of the cost of OEM gear. Interoptic products are 100% tested and backed up by real engineers. Work with the optics experts at Interoptic. Find out more at interoptic.com/packetpushers.
Could network automation be simple? Maybe I don't mean simple. Could network automation be predictable? Could it be standardized in approach, company to company, so that we're all doing it the same way? Our guest today is Ryan Shaw, and he thinks a network automation framework that would work for all of us is possible. Welcome to Heavy Networking. I am your host, Ethan Banks, and Drew Conry-Murray is with me. You can connect with us on LinkedIn and via the Packet Pushers community Slack. And joining me and Drew and Ryan is David Sinn. And David joined us for our discussion about network sources of truth back in episode 717. So Ryan and David, I'd appreciate if the two of you would quickly introduce yourselves to the audience, starting with you, Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan, and I am a network architect at Zscaler.
Okay, nice to meet you. And David Sinn.
Yes, I'm David Sinn. I work for the University of Washington. I'm in the network architecture team, formerly with AWS and a couple of vendors and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I guess you guys know each other, Ryan and David, because you worked together at AWS back in the day.
Yes.
Yeah, very good. Very good. All right. So I got a leading question to open us up with here, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Are we moving to a place in networking where changes can't be done by hand due to network complexity? That is, eventually we're going to have to automate any change that we make to the network.
So I think no. I think the issue is services are more critically relying on the underlying internet infrastructure. So it's more about a stability and reliability and feature growth that requires automation to meet those criteria.
Yeah, I'd support that. I would say it's a spectrum. There are definitely networks that are extraordinarily complicated that without automation, it would not be able to be deployed very well. But, Ryan hit the nail on the head, which is this is really about stability, ensuring that the network is working the way that we intend it, and then allowing the engineers to focus on the high value work of designing the network, figuring out problems, things along those lines, which, you remove the burden of, manual configuration and also just human mistakes.
I'm curious if you see network complexity actually as a barrier to automation.
I would say it definitely can be. I think people, we as engineers like our nerd knobs, to use a classic phrase. And so we potentially turn on more features because we feel that it allows us to more accurately meet the requirements of the network. So that definitely does happen.
Yeah, definitely. I would view complexity as just a barrier to just generally handling your network today. If you're going to operate it by hand or by automation, it's the same thing, just a better, just the computer's taking the process that an engineer would. So the complexity is just going to complicate that and increase the time and reliability of that. So yeah, definitely.
You guys both mentioned reliability, that was a big concern here for automation. One of the things automation is going to bring to us is that if we automate it, everything's predictable. Therefore, the human error is eliminated. Is that the reliability component you're getting at?
So I think humans are limited in that degree of being able to, validate a network, especially today's networks and stuff, where there's more services on the network. There's more metrics that this get generated that you have to now check whether it is right or wrong. And so, I can count to, I think a high number, but I can't count to 800,000 metrics in, a couple of minutes and go, yeah, that was the right set. So.
Yeah, asking a human being to parse text on whether the intended change that just went in actually is doing exactly the thing that you want on one system, let alone hundreds of systems, that's destined for errors to be introduced and failures to happen. And so, as Ryan hit earlier, the criticality of networking today just makes that not a good direction to go for most networks. I'm sure there are very small networks that a human being can wrap their head around the entirety of it, but the vast majority of networks, automation is definitely improving the availability.
Yeah, it's funny you put it that way, the smaller networks. Back in the day, if I was working on a network and I had built each segment, each office that was tied to, say a mid-sized business with a bunch of remote offices here and there, you could kind of keep that all in your head. You kind of knew the address schemes, you knew the VLAN schemes, you probably standardized as best as you could office to office, and it was possible to keep it all in your head, especially if you did things same from facility to facility as best as you could. It's pretty hard to imagine that as you begin layering in security services and different authentication schemes, and zero trust network access becomes part of what you're doing, and you've got one or more overlays that you're contending with. Trying to keep it all in my head and remembering what's happening where, and oh, wait a minute, this policy here because this reason, it's getting to the point it feels impossible to keep it all in your head, really, even if you built it all. And if it's a network of size where there's a whole team of people, I mean, it's just, no, forget it. It's just unrealistic. So another question, guys. There's an argument for artisanal network automation because everyone's network is different. So therefore, we're going to automate things in our own way, network to network. We couldn't possibly do it the same everywhere because all of our networks are different. Is that a valid argument?
So I'm going to say not really, because I think networks are not as artisanal as a lot of people think. I think because the trend for every network should be to be as simple as boring as possible. And yes, there's giant networks, cloud computing networks. We worked at AWS, David and I. But those were actually really simple and boring because they just needed to be. Any sort of complexity that wasn't absolutely necessary was just could not scale, could not operate at the stability that we needed. And so when that trend hits, that simplistic trends, we see a lot of networks that, if they share the same services, are kind of homogenous. And I think that's just the benefit of everyone, because then we get to iterate, we get to improve the designs, we get to do better things than trying to jumble through a mess of VLANs and craziness.
I guess I'm going to come at your question at a slightly different angle. I don't disagree with what Ryan just said, but I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. In that, akin to the Network Source of Truth podcast you had me on for a little while back, automation is a spectrum term. It is not a single specific term. And so part of the root of the question that you asked is complexity inside of the network, and some of that is the business logic of the network in question. The raw low-level automation, I need to bring up a link between two devices, I need to put IP addresses, I need to run a routing protocol, those sorts of things. Those are building blockable, Legoable automation fundamentals that you can build together. Where it becomes tricky is how do you actually express the business logic of we're all doing the same thing slightly differently, and I view things in this way and you view things in that way, and our networks are embodied in that case. And so that's really the crux of the flexibility of the engine of automation.
Can you give an example of business logic complicating a network?
Yeah, so I guess where I would start is, do you have a lot of VRFs in your network, or are you one big flat routed network? Are you a layer 2 dominated network versus a layer 3 dominated network? Do I generally have core routers that are bringing up all of my VLANs from all of my distributed campus resources and routing in the middle, and everything is just sort of L2 at the edge? Or do I go distributed and every building on my campus has, separate routers inside of it? And so some of that is the business rules. Do I have a VoIP VLAN separate from an accounting VLAN, separate from a business engineering VLAN, and how do I manage those differences and the policies and or what policy devices are involved, going through firewalls, IPSs, IDSs. And so that's where the real variance is. They're all fairly fundamental components, but it's how you assemble them. So it sort of is I guess to carry the Lego analogy, like there's a fundamental set of Lego bricks, but it's the instruction manual on what actual kit you end up with, but they're all basically built out of the same basic components.
So Ryan, translate all of this as an introductory part of our conversation to your idea of a generalized automation framework. What is that, and what's it look like at a high level?
Yeah, so I think also just kind of adding to David on that too as well is it is this kind of base set. Like you get this, Lego set, you get the car set or the Magic Castle set or the spaceship, and then you can add things to that. But the general thing is it's a spaceship, it's a car, it's going to have wheels, it's going to have the body, it's going to have the frames, it's going to have the engine. So there's some like business logic and stuff, but how you use those blocks may be a little bit different, but the overall arching kind of design is the same. And that's what I want to tackle is that design. Like, can we make this car design public? And can we make it, simplistic and it works for a lot of people so we can then iterate and improve upon it? If everyone's building their own cars, like, yeah, they might have cool engine tweaks or, awesome flaming decals. But, how can we make the base car, modules and work?
So the Open Compute Project's done some work in I guess not in the network automation framework area specifically, but certainly what you had just described reminded me of what OCP does. Is it related to that in some way?
Kind of, sort of. This is where I kind of got into like NAF with the Network Automation Forum is kind of using that as a vehicle to build a vehicle of just trying to get this consensus of people's expertise and experience and to get this kind of forum that people can view and stuff. So yeah, so pretty similar in a way.
So then give us some ideas of what this framework would consist of. When we think of framework, like if I'm an engineer and I want to use your framework, what am I looking at? Is it a document that guides me how to build an automation pipeline? What is this thing?
Yeah, so I wanted to first start as a document that details kind of all the big pieces that an automation framework for deployment would use. So instead of just people building off like the one block that they get and then trying to expand upon and not knowing the end state, trying to detail that end state, so people can work backwards from that end state and find the pieces that fit or are missing or that works for them. So not exactly here's a detailed solution because every people might have different tools, different languages that they want to use, but more of here's the building blocks that would take to build this, this solution.
So are you proposing different frameworks for different outcomes? If we use the Lego model, a framework for the car version, a framework for the spaceship version, a framework for the castle version, or can this framework be applied regardless of the endpoint product?
So the initial framework is trying to be pretty flexible, but I think at the end of the day, there probably will be frameworks for a car, or a spaceship, or a castle. I'm liking this Lego trend. That fits the company and the customers and the clients the best. But I think to start with, we can use a car that can generally do lots of things that people need and networks and customers need. So I think start with that, make it very flexible, and then as iterations get through and more experience and expertise molds this, maybe we get to different versions.
And so you mentioned sort of starting with the document. Is this document kind of outlining principles? Is it discussing tools, processes? What's inside the document?
Principles and processes with some light touch on tools, because I don't want it to be restrictive to any tools, and also don't want to have to anyone NDAs or anything like that to go, here's how I absolutely did it. More kind of principles and processes to guide, the general, like, okay, here's some ways to validate the network, pre and post deployment. Here's a configuration, life cycle that you could use to push, different versions of the configuration that you want. So those practices that have worked well, a lot of practices that people may not be aware of, like, okay, I built this deployment thing. Oh, I have to worry about scheduling and clashing and all these things that work with a distributed system. So bits and pieces like that. So the obvious and hopefully the not so obvious that people go, oh, okay, I would have fallen that pitfall.
So you're not saying like use GitHub and structure your repository in this way for your infrastructure as code stanzas. You're not being that detailed, but you're saying maybe something that's a little more abstract. Use a code repository and you should be expressing your infrastructure as code. And here's some guidelines.
Definitely. I don't want the people to go, hey, you need to learn this language, or you need to, if it's in JSON, no, scrap it, put it in YAML, or use this tool. I want people to go, yeah, you should use, you should maybe use a, markup language, or I know YAML may not be yet another markup language, but use something like that. Like, use JSON or YAML or whatever, or Pickle, the new thing come out.
Yes.
But yeah, not trying to be too prescriptive that it forces someone to go, okay, use what you're comfortable with and use what your expertise has.
Talk to us about life cycle, Ryan. I think you mentioned that along the way, that there'd be a life cycle here. Help me as an engineer, if I'm used to configuring things by hand, I'm trying to get my head around automation and I want to do it right by using your framework. and I'm thinking in terms of I typically type this stuff out by hand, or me and my team do, and how would that be expressed? This notion of life cycle in your framework.
Yeah, so I think it's trying to my lifestyle just follows the kind of the traditional process that you get from, you find that you have the design, which could be in the, in the templates and configuration management, and then you actually have to build it. You add the variables and templates to that configuration management, do all the code reviews, make sure it's all good. And then it's time to actually, scale or push or deploy. And then what are all the steps to deploy that? And then finally operate, how do we operate that? And this kind of follows that kind of traditional process because, it resonates with a lot of us and it's easy to kind of, okay, if it's a process that's well known, we can kind of just iterate on it. I'd rather not try and revolutionize the processes more than iterate kind of what we do today, whether that be manual or automated.
What I'm hearing you say sounds a lot like what I hear on the developer side of the house with CI/CD, pipeline, and so on. And I could see network engineers being like, eh. So is there also like a cultural component to this? I don't know if cultural is the right word, but you know what I mean? Like people are used to doing things a certain way, and this is a different way of doing their job.
I think it is because I'm going to use the SDL, the software defined like SDLC, the software designed life cycle. There's a lot of things that we can use networking. I think David was a big part of this at AWS for doing this. So I'll let him speak to kind of like the more intricacies of this. But I think yes, let's use the best. Let's use what works in a software. Networking is closely aligned with the software side. So yeah, it might be a different culture, a different mindset, but that's the beauty of technology is that we are growing and evolving.
Yeah, I think some of it is also iteration. Part of it is if you try and hit that end goal, if everything is fully automated day one, you're going to have a lot of resistance from the engineering teams because they haven't been brought along. So, there was definitely, I've been involved in automation solutions in the past where the engineers were not exactly 100% on board, or it was definitely a meme ripe environment for outcomes. So, but the important part was we improved the network. So for instance, we had a solution at one point in time where the set of steps that were happening on the network were broken up into these tiny little individual chunks where the computer system did the bulk of it. They did the pre-check, they did the deploy the configuration, it did the post-check, and generally the engineer was sitting there hitting yes to proceed for a while. And that spawned a whole set of memes of, one engineer had his son do the configuration change because he just sat there and continued to be able to hit the yes. But the important part of that was it broke down the change into discrete chunks. It had validations around those changes. And at the time where we were on that curve, we need a human being to make sure that the configuration change was reaching the outcome that we wanted. And so the human was still in the loop, as opposed to we had not yet built the solution around it to do all of that purely in software. And so the important part there was it brought the engineers along. It was a step change as opposed to, nope, day one, the automation does the entirety of this. And you can accomplish it that way, but you have to have full buy-in that the engineers see the efficiency and improvement versus bringing everybody along. And I'm a bit more on a bring everybody along sort of approach.
But I guess what's in it for me as the engineer if my job is now just hitting yes as the computer walks through the steps?
Well, hopefully you're not having to get up as much at 3 a.m. to go make those changes, and you're spending more time in traditional waking hours working on actual real engineering problems. You're probably also then not getting paged at 5 a.m. when some subtle part of the change you meant to go do didn't quite work out the way you want, and I'm a West Coast guy. East Coast is suddenly coming on board, and you're experiencing some problems. So the reality is, it lets you focus on your high value things, coming up with the designs, figuring out how to meet the customer requirements, and less of the rote of looking at the outputs of your routing protocols, looking at the current state of your network, and allowing the tools to help expose. Did the change that you just do meet the outcome you were looking for?
Yeah, another piece of it from my perspective, true. I mean, I've written some complex changes that are many steps, and it's going to take me by hand to execute these at least an hour and a half or 2 hours if everything goes really well.
Mhm.
And then you're sitting there at 2 in the morning, you're tired, you've been anxious about the change, you're sitting there, you're worried about it, you're a little, your brain's not 100% because it is 2 in the morning and it's cold in that data center as you're making those changes. And things inevitably don't go 100% right. And then you're like, oh, okay, what is going on here? And you're trying to think, what is it I should be checking to figure out why this BGP adjacency isn't coming up or why traffic's not flowing through the firewall now or whatever it is. You're not at your best at that moment. If you've programmatically put the automation in place to put the change in place to begin with, and then confirm that it's right because you've pre-programmed all of the data gathering to pull back from the infrastructure and confirm that I had X number of adjacencies. I still have X number of adjacencies. I had X number of routes in the routing table, and I still have X number of routes in the routing table, or whatever the change you're expecting to see is in fact in place. That's what's in it for me. That's amazing. Again, that 2 in the morning change as an engineer, I've always found myself at my worst going, man, I hope the notes I wrote and all the spreadsheets and all these plain text files where I'm copy pasting into devices are just on it. And I didn't make any mistakes, because if it didn't, I don't want to have to think about it. I really don't. Wired on caffeine and freaking out, and your boss going, how we doing? We gonna have to roll this thing back. We've only got an hour left in the window, having that conversation.
That makes sense. Let's pause for a message from our sponsor, Interoptic. Interoptic is the optical transceiver and cable specialist that maximizes your IT savings while minimizing network failures. Interoptic provides high-performing optics at a fraction of the price of brand-name optics. The Interoptic experts can help you spec the best optical transceivers and cables for your network environment. Interoptic optical transceivers are 100% guaranteed to be operationally equivalent with Cisco, Juniper, Extreme, Arista, Brocade, Palo Alto, and many other switches and routers. Due to Interoptic's deep optical transceiver technical experience, they can ensure that all messages, alerts, alarms, and threshold data are equivalent to OEM brands. Interoptic deploys rigorous 100% testing on their devices before they're shipped. Interoptic optical transceivers are built to the exact same quality standards as the OEMs and typically come from the exact same manufacturing lines. That's why insurance companies, retailers, financial services, and federal and state government customers deploy optics and cables from Interoptic. You can purchase the same, if not better performing optical transceivers, tested and backed up by real engineers at a fraction of OEM costs. Find out more at interoptic.com/packetpushers. That's interoptic.com/packetpushers. And now back to the podcast. So is this framework then going to, is one of the goals to help me sort of break down all those processes into sub-processes and figure out where I can start doing the automation and taking out the human grunt work?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the goals that I was striving for is detail all the processes, but also describe the processes and what the benefits are and what we can use. So when you look at this, you can go, okay, I have a pain point here. Okay, I can see this process. Okay, to build, I might need these building blocks to help me build this out to make it reliable and not break down. But it's to build that kind of okay, I need this piece. I can go grab it and I can use it and understand it.
So is the framework we're talking about, like it's a document, I'm going to read this thing? I mean, so I know we're abstracted. We're not prescriptive as far as tools and that kind of thing. But is there some amount of specificity we get into, like the programming logic, or we need to be using version control, or you said you're not going to get into things like, YAML versus XML versus JSON or those kind of things, but are there maybe templates in there? How specific do you get, I guess?
Yeah, I want to be specific enough that people aren't left wondering how would I ever build this. So I want to be specific, like, okay, yes, it needs to be a repo, or here's ways to version it and stuff, or like, yes, use templates for this. Like, for instance, a workflow, which is a series of steps and logics. Like, okay, you might want to template this, or here's how you could do logic in a programming language. And for like validation checks, I was going to expand to like, how do you write decent validation checks? How do you make them simplistic and have wide coverage? So there definitely needs to be some detail, some lower level detail in there without, me going, use Python, use Go, and here's the thing. But going, yes, here's a basic programming logic step that you can use to deliver that piece. So it needs that depth. Yeah.
I think it also offers up opportunities for people to bring best common practices in. Like, part of it is you should shift the traffic off of the device before you perform an operation on it. So that's a fairly open term. Some people might say, okay, I'm just going to shut routing protocol off on things because that will cause a shift because my network is designed to be redundant and I can yank any cable anywhere and it will just work. That's definitely an approach. Another approach is to present the let's leverage our routing protocols to basically make that node not a preferred way for anything to go through. How do you do that? How do you rationalize that? And so that opens up areas for people to put in their best practices so that can be shared, and make it a little more specific, and also show that this is how it's not as hard as you may think, or it may not be as many steps as you may think.
So then if I'm translating the framework document into my own, I'm looking at best common practices and so on. It looks like I'm going to be more or less creating the specific steps that are going to map my automation practice to the framework by hand. There's not going to be a lot of, I would describe it, pre-existing artifacts. There's not going to be there's not a collection of Jinja templates in there for me to use necessarily.
Not today. I can't speak for what tomorrow brings, but there could be. There definitely could be if someone's willing to describe that. That's not going to bar any NDAs or any stuff like that. If they want to build that and add that, great. I think that's the beauty of the NAF community in general is they can take that and here's how I implemented it in detail. Here's all the language and everything like that that I did. That's not going to be the today goal of that, but that could be a possibility.
No, this is a guideline document is how I'm beginning to think of it as you're describing it to me, right? This is I don't even know where to start. I can read this thing and I can walk away and go, okay, I know how to start now. I know how to get going. I know the goal where I'm headed to. And maybe I'm not going to build it all at once, but I've got this framework that I know this is how I want to. It's a guideline on network operations, really, how I do network operations. It's going to be a way that guides my thinking, how I approach this, how I think about it. That's quite different from the artisanal by hand approach.
Yeah, definitely. I think if I had to summarize the absolute premise is it's a roadmap that allows you to work backwards. In today's online, there's none of that today. There's no documentation to go end to end. So if I build a piece, I am now going to fall into pitfalls. I'm going to have pain points. So my goal with this document is a way to work backwards, so people can avoid that. Leverage my experience and others' experience to grow this into a document that kind of gives people the right start. Rather than just grabbing a tool off the shelf and then trying to make that work for them.
Is there a process or task that you think might be ideal for an organization that's coming to this framework for the first time and trying to implement automation globally throughout the network to start with, like a task or function that is a good starting point?
Yeah, I think if I were to narrow down to the kind of three core low-hanging fruits thing would be definitely validation, to remove that from humans. As stated earlier, the amount of metrics today in networks, humans can't validate that in their head. So validation.
Validation meaning a change we made actually took place and is having the outcome we wanted?
Yeah, not just the outcome, but that's not impacting the rest of the network too as well. So a lot of validation is kind of static saying, yes, this VLAN did exist. I want to bring that to not only did the VLAN did exist, the change that it didn't break the rest of the network. We're not creating a routing loop somewhere or services aren't impacted. So kind of full a holistic validation process, I guess, a system-wide validation process. The drain or shift traffic away, because having that automated makes it, I'm kind of trying to double up between deployment and operations. So it's like it's extendable to multiple teams. So it gives you the best value for your company's buck, basically, for resources. So, how many times, operations just has to drain traffic away from a specific function or device to solve an issue, and deployment, it eases those two things, eases a lot for that. And then if kind of a deployment thing is just how do we do easy changes that may not require a lot of complicated logic and then build from there. Probably my three main kind of keystones for this.
It's funny what you say about the draining, that whole thing. It's such a common thing. It's the first thing you got to do. I'm running, parallel infrastructure that it's active. Okay, we're going to swing it all. We're all going this way, and then we got to make sure this is drained. Or load balancing, is this pool member no longer accepting traffic so we can do maintenance on it, whatever it might be. And it's so tedious, just waiting and waiting. Please stop sending traffic this way so I can do my maintenance. No, we still got a bunch of persistent connections stuck through this box. When is it going to end? Just to automate that so now okay, it's been drained. You can just kind of see it happening without manually going in, checking and looking at Netstat or whatever it is you're looking at to validate where you are, where you need to be. That's a great thing. Okay, I got a loaded question for you here. One that people have heard me talk on this topic before. Going to go, Banks, would you let it go? But here's the question. Will networkers need to re-architect their networks to use this framework?
No, half no. So I think what will happen is that the mindsets will change and a lot of networks become more simple in the process. Because if you're building a network by hand, you can add a bunch of crazy features and you can kind of do that. And the processes can be kind of unwieldy, but it kind of works. It might take an extra 30 minutes, but it kind of works. The framework is supposed to be adaptable and flexible, that it doesn't, it's going to be harder to implement on complex networks. But after you build it and you kind of see this lifecycle process from automation happen, you realize, oh, if I did it this way, it's going to be a lot easier to automate. And it turns out at the end that if it's easier to automate, it was easier to operate, it's easier to scale and deploy anyways.
I guess I'll throw out there a more strong yes. And I'll say yes for exactly the reason Ryan is highlighting, if and only if, because if you look at traffic shifting off a device, it will remove I want to get everything to move away from this device so I can operate on it. It will get away from, static routes are okay to keep in your network. Active standby is a safe way to operate my network as opposed to active. Like it will teach you, you will see the benefits of other approaches. And so fundamentally, how could it not make networks change how they approach things? I'm sure there will be outliers who will be stuck with the ways that they have always loved to do things, but most organizations will see the benefits of moving in a more common direction.
But going back, David, to your initial issue around business logic, which leads to complexity and nerd knobbing and stuff, does that have an impact on this framework? Because in the end, the business logic is going to sort of drive the way things have to be done.
It definitely can, but it may also highlight the extraordinarily strong conversations you have to have, which is, I went to try and take everything off this device, and because we're doing Y, I couldn't. And so I knocked out the accounting team because of this. And so, that is definitely not a spot that I think most engineers would want to get stuck into. And That's an indelicate conversation to have. And so you will always have exceptions in the network. You always have different approaches to how solving it. But some of the edge business rules on I do this because, this makes the network more efficient can start getting removed because you can't actually reach the outcome you want, which is I want to do maintenance and not break other people while I'm doing maintenance on this device.
And is there room in this framework, or part of this framework is also talking to business folks if you are trying to automate a portion of the network that has a very specific business function, to bring them in? Do they have a role here, or is that we don't need to go there?
I think it's a little out scope of the framework, only because that kind of depends. Like it should be, when you're doing design changes and stuff like that, you should have the stakeholders involved, the appropriate stakeholders involved to make that decision making. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's in this framework to dictate how that's done or yes, do this. But I think, it is kind of a critical kind of business aspect for teams to make sure that, all the key players are there and are heard and understood.
And are you aiming this framework at a particular like seniority level? Is this something that a junior network engineer can bring in and advocate for? Or is it something that sort of happens at the architect or designer level and then, flows downward?
So I'm not going to try and do an AWS plug, but the one great thing about AWS is that there was no like seniority level there. Like, I came in as a junior engineer and I could share my ideas. So I think my abstraction to that is yes, definitely junior engineers can take this and detail it. The one caveat is make sure you bring metrics, make sure you support this with data, to make sure that you can measure it against how you're doing and then how well it performs. But yeah, definitely. I don't think there's any seniority aspect that's required for this.
Yeah, I would second that. I think it's very uh, company or location specific. There are definitely some environments where it would not be looked positively on, but ones that do allow the more junior engineers to come up with ideas and have the measures to go and show, this can definitely help regardless of what seniority it comes in at. So it'll be very specific.
I think I know the answer to this question that I'm going to ask based on what we've been talking about, but I'm going to throw it out there anyways. It's interesting. Would a framework like this be suitable for a full-blown network automation product to be built around it? Hey, we built this product and it's based, in part on, this generally accepted framework.
Absolutely. I think it'd be super beneficial to both sides of the story. I think I'm only building the framework because there isn't an available easy framework that I understand and mesh with out there. If someone else built it, I'd probably pay the price for that. Because it saves resources and such. So I definitely see that being a definite avenue for people that want to productize this and sell this. And also, I think at the other side, it goes, yes, I understand the framework. I understand what you're selling. Now I can see the entire picture rather than you're selling this piece. What about that piece? I don't quite understand. Oh, I bought it and it's not working for this piece. I think it kind of clarifies pictures on both sides.
Yeah, I guess I would throw out a second yes on that in that having seen how an environment like AWS operates where there are a lot of teams able to make extraordinarily independent decisions to solve the problems that we have. Some of the framework we're talking about here was modeled at least 3 separate times inside of AWS, all solved in different ways because there were the framework was consistent, but the maturity of the tooling that we had in that space for the separate teams was very different. And so they all ended up kind of ending up in the same spot eventually. They just took slightly different paths. And so there were technically actually parallel implementations. So yes, multiple organizations could make make solutions that are built around this framework.
So that's okay. That's actually not quite where I thought you guys were going to go. Since the framework is not prescriptive, since the framework does not tell you use this tool, do this, your network must be sorted in such a way, although naturally your network may be more simplified so that it's easier to use the framework. I figured it'd be too open to be able to really get a product that's built around it. But I see where you're going now. If you do use this, your network's going to kind of end up in the same place. As tooling evolved, David, you said everyone kind of ended up in the same place over time. And so, yeah, that could lend itself to a vendor who wants to build a product around the framework going, yeah, we have a product that matches this workflow, this life cycle, and brings the tooling together to accomplish that.
I think, Ethan, you also underestimate the creativity of vendor marketing departments to say they align with the framework.
I think we all underestimate marketing. They are definitely the smartest people in the room. But yeah, I would say is, trying to be this, the framework's kind of more declarative, actually kind of like imperative or pieces can be built by, a productized solution or in-house and stuff. And as long as the declarative kind of approach is aligned, I think that will work. I think, yes, we do support the drain in this manner, how the logic is done and stuff, I think is, can be abstracted away and still work.
So does this framework actually exist? Are you working on a document right now, or is this just like we're in the idea phase, throwing it around and kicking the tires?
The framework actually exists. It's in a couple of weeks I'll have more time to really kind of flesh it out. I thought about it, put some notes in and stuff like that. But I think I've got a good way to kind of get at least to, people can view it, people can edit and comment on it today. But in a few weeks, I think it'll really kind of be even more fleshed out.
So are you looking for help on it? Are you looking for collaboration, open source style, or?
I'm going to be, completely self-centered, and I'm looking for collaboration because I'm definitely not the smartest person in the world, and I believe that multiple minds are better than one. So I want to find out the solution myself, and so if I can get more people, interested in kind of building this and adding to it and iterating through it, I think it serves my purpose. So yeah, definitely.
Now, I'm in the network automation forum Slack, and I know that you've had some discussions in there around it. Is that the best place to go to connect with you and have chats about network automation framework?
Yeah, I think the Slack and I think on the doc itself, either are both fine places for it.
Okay, so there's a doc where I can, like a Google Doc, I can go in and make notes.
There's a
and so
Google
on?
Doc for sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, you've got to give us the link for that, and maybe we can share it in the show notes. Is that okay, or is that going to be too open?
That's totally fine. Yeah, I do not care about openness. Go for it. Like, yeah,
Okay.
people can slaughter it online. I am totally happy with that.
Okay.
Yeah, you asked for it.
I am no stranger to my ideas and designs getting slaughtered, so that's it. Okay.
All right. Well, Ryan, so we've said the network automation forum, Slack group is a good place to get in touch with it. Anywhere else, LinkedIn, other ways people can get in touch with you?
LinkedIn, pretty much, just the other way. I mean, feel free to send me a message or connect.
And then, David, thanks once again for your contributions and insights here. It seems like now we got to you've been like the additional guest that's come on for a couple of shows now. We got to just talk to David at some point and glean from your experience. But how do people get in touch with you, David?
I am definitely on LinkedIn. I'm also on the automation framework Slack. So yes, either of those paths are totally good way to get a hold of me.
Get on the network automation forum Slack. That's networkautomation.forum. And if you click around, you'll find it pretty easily. You can get over to that Slack group. There's a few hundred people in there, at least at this point, having all kinds of conversations. And it's welcoming for whatever level of experience you've got as far as network automation goes. There's a Birds of a Feather group, a BOP for getting started. So if you're truly new to this and you're looking for recommendations of books and courses and just trying to get your head around network automation in general, there's been some discussions in there for people that are truly coming in at the ground level. So don't be intimidated by like, oh, I'm not an automation expert. I'm not going to jump in there. Everyone will, call me dumb. No, it's designed for everyone to get going with network automation. So again, networkautomation.forum. And of course, Network Automation Forum has a couple of events. The AutoCon series. AutoCon 0 was in November 2023 in the US. There's going to be AutoCon 1 happening in May 2024 in Europe. As we're recording this, details are TBD, but coming very soon. And then another one, AutoCon 2, will be happening again in November 2024. So networkautomation.forum to find out all that stuff. Packet Pusher is the official media partner of the Network Automation Forum and the AutoCon events. So that's why we're so enthusiastic and about promoting those events. The first one was great. We're really looking forward to the additional AutoCons that are coming up in 2024. My thanks to David and Ryan for sharing their perspectives on heavy networking today. And I've been your host, Ethan Banks, along with Drew Conry-Murray. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. You're 100% welcome to send me messages about the show. Or you could DM me on the Packet Pushers community Slack group. That's packetpushers.net/community to sign up for the Slack group there. And if heavy networking is the only podcast you listen to from the Packet Pushers, you really are missing out. We have several other shows, including Network Automation Nerds with Eric Chow. And if you're like, oh, I already am subscribed to that one, he's on Packet Pushers now. Yes, Eric has joined us. He has joined the Packet Pushers. And then Drew is with JJ Manel on Packet Protector, a brand new network security podcast. And then, of course, there's Day 2 Cloud with Ned Bellavance and Kyler Middleton, Heavy Wireless with Keith Parsons, and several more. These podcasts, along with our YouTube channel, blogs, and newsletters, are all free content created for your professional career development. Find it all at packetpushers.net. Last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.